California Governor Gavin Newsom's clumsy, broad-based lockdown response to the coronavirus pandemic is reckless and irresponsible. The Guardian News reported that during California's first shutdown, unemployment skyrocketed from 5.5% to 16.4% in the first 2 months of the pandemic. More than 2.6 million jobs were lost, and now Newsom is locking the state down again. Newsom's strategy foolishly disregards the negative consequences of his actions. In August 2020, a survey conducted by the Small Business Majority found that 44% of all California small businesses were at risk of shutting down because of the pandemic. Online ratings giant Yelp found that California is the second worst state for restaurant closures, behind only Hawaii. Before the pandemic, 1.4 million Californians worked in restaurants, but since March of 2020, between 900,000 to 1 million of those workers were either laid off or furloughed. Newsom's lockdown strategy focuses only on coronavirus case metrics and ignores education, unemployment, mental and physical health, and economic stability. Remember back in March when they told us that this was all supposed to last for just a few weeks? If Newsom's lockdown strategy is legitimate, then why are we still locked down 9 months later and counting? Our kids are still not back in schools. Restaurants, gyms, and small businesses are closed, yet coronavirus cases are still raging. Governor Newsom devised an elaborate, ever-changing color-tiered scheme for locking down the state of California. The color scheme is based on coronavirus test positivity, infection rates, and more recently includes hospital ICU capacity. In the early days of the pandemic, Newsom devised a watch list to monitor COVID-19 behavior by county. There were 6 virus containment offenses that could land your county on the watch list. Basically, it boiled down to either accumulating too many COVID-19 cases, or accumulating cases too quickly, or not testing enough people, or running low on hospital beds or ventilators. Then in August of 2020, Newsom transitioned to a county-by-county 4-color tier system: yellow, orange, red, and purple. A yellow grade meant good behavior and was the reward for very low infection rates. Yellow grade counties were granted permission to all normal living privileges, but at the other end of the scale was the purple tier. A purple grade meant very bad behavior and was the consequence of a county showing a high number of infections and a high infection rate. The sentence for a county measuring purple was suspension of nearly all recreational living privileges. That meant no visiting friends and family, no eating at restaurants, indoors or outdoors, and no attending church. In the purple tier, a resident was maybe allowed to go to work depending on whether or not your place of business was deemed essential work. You were allowed to go to the grocery store or get takeout food and then go home and go to bed. In December 2020, Newsom announced a new regional stay-at-home order, which effectively layered on top of the prior 4-color tier system. The new stay-at-home order broke California down into 5 regions: Northern California, Greater Sacramento, the Bay Area, San Joaquin Valley, and Southern California. If a region's ICU bed availability dropped below 15%, the county fell into stay-at-home or lock-in status. A county could move into the lock-in tier sooner than the rest of its region, but not slower. That is, if your region degraded to lock-in status, your county fell under the severe lock-in restrictions regardless of your particular county's COVID-19 performance metrics. Even if a county was not affected by a stay-at-home order, the county was still governed by the 4-tier reopening scheme. Gavin Newsom's coronavirus monitoring system may seem overly complex and confusing, but it at least focused on reducing virus transmission statistics. But the problem is, the governor's plan only focuses on the virus transmission statistics. His coronavirus strategy is not balanced. What you will not see in any of Newsom's pandemic briefings is a color tier for the number of Californians unemployed or the number of restaurants failed. And you will not hear the governor announce a new go-to-work order or declare that counties on the watch list must increase restaurant capacity to 70% in response to their unacceptably high unemployment rate. There's no balance in his strategy. There are almost no scenarios in the real world where it is acceptable to focus on just one potential problem while throwing all other consequences and dangers out the window. According to the National Restaurant Association, nearly 1 in 6 restaurants in the U.S. are closed either long-term or permanently due to our response to the pandemic. That figure works out to about 100,000 restaurants. California restaurants are performing far worse than the national average, as 1 in 3 or 33% of restaurants told the California Restaurant Association that they will either close permanently or downsize by closing some locations. Restaurants in California have been repeatedly shut down and reopened under Newsom's orders. Many owners had invested tens of thousands of dollars shoring up their restaurants with plexiglass dividers, outdoor settings, heating lamps, signage, and PPE for their employees. They had done all this only to be shut down again and again, including outdoor dining. According to the San Diego Union Tribune, just 1 of 8 restaurant operators contacted was preparing to reopen.
The dramatic plunge in our nation's employment is shocking. Unemployment cuts twofold. First, unemployment reduces the amount of incoming revenue to the state and the nation. Second, those same unemployed workers who were kicking in dollars now rely on the state and the federal government to pay them financial support such as unemployment and food assistance. As of July 31st, some 163,000 businesses have indicated on Yelp that they have closed. Yelp data revealed that permanent closures have reached 97,000, meaning 60% of the closed businesses won't be reopening. As of December of 2020, my kids, a 9th grader and a 5th grader, have been out of school for 9 consecutive calendar months. I estimate that they have missed approximately 6.5 months of in-school learning, real school as I refer to it. My 10-year-old often ends her distance learning day by 11 a.m. On Wednesdays, she doesn't have distance learning class at all. It isn't exactly clear why the school hours have been cut so drastically, but one thing is clear. Our children are getting a subpar education with this distance learning stuff. Gavin Newsom allowed private schools in California to seek waivers to reopen, which of course they did. In fact, Newsom's 4 kids have been back in their Sacramento private classrooms since October 2020. But our public school kids are still getting distance learning with no end in sight. Our schools are relatively well equipped with sufficient IT equipment and resources for online learning. But both my 14-year-old and my nephew, who lives in New Jersey, told me that it's often difficult to pay attention with online school. My nephew said that many kids are cheating on the tests and homework assignments. He said he felt like he wasn't really learning. It broke my heart to hear him say this, but I knew he was right. My nephew even wondered why this coronavirus distance learning period should even count. Why not just rewind and play it back? I had never honestly considered that. What if we just froze the school clock with the lockdowns? We'd let our kids pick up where they left off back when they were in real school. But enough about my kids. Many families are far less fortunate than mine. According to the U.S. Census, approximately 3 million students in the United States do not have internet access at home. That's about 17% of all U.S. students. Wired UK columnist Oliver Franklin Wallace put it this way: the switch to distance learning is likely to exacerbate a pattern well established in natural disasters. Those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds are often the worst affected. Franklin Wallace goes on to reference a study which confirms the obvious. A 2019 study called The Long Run Effects of Teacher Strikes found that students in Argentina who missed up to 90 days of school in the 1980s and 90s due to teacher strikes were less likely to earn a degree, more likely to be unemployed, and earn 2 to 3% less on average than those from areas less impacted by the strikes. Sam Sims, a research fellow at the UCL Institute of Education, sums the study's findings up this way. Unfortunately, it's in the category of empirical research confirming the obvious. When people don't go to school, they don't learn as much, and the longer they're not at school, the more they don't learn. I know there are a lot of dedicated teachers out there who sincerely care about their students, and I take my hat off to these professionals who are committed to our children's future. But sadly, it seems that the majority of teachers, and certainly the teachers' unions, care a whole lot about their own personal health risks and don't care nearly as much about the damage this is doing to our children. I'm just being honest. Now, I will say that I believe that the teacher's position is certainly understandable. After all, everybody looks out for themselves first, right? Here's a quote from Deborah Eduardo, Los Angeles County Superintendent of Schools. "We know that young people learn best in the classroom. However, the health and safety of students and school staff must come first. I applaud Governor Newsom for making this everybody's top priority while recognizing that learning is also non-negotiable." Now, the studies have shown that kids are 1. Much less likely to contract the virus, 2. Much more resilient at fighting the COVID virus even if they do contract it, and 3. Suffer much milder symptoms even if they do catch the virus. While on the other hand, older people, and especially those with compromised immune systems or underlying health conditions, are more vulnerable to the illness. So does anyone really believe that the schools are locked down because they're prioritizing our kids' welfare? And for their part, the California Teachers Association has fought fiercely to keep our public schools closed from the very beginning back in March 2020. In October of 2020, the CTA wrote a letter to the governor and superintendent of public instruction stating that the union was uneasy about reopening schools in the next couple of months due to a recent surge of infections. And now we will be going into the year 2021 with our kids still distance learning, falling further behind, and no return to the classrooms in sight. Remember, reports are that the teachers are unwilling to go back into the classrooms until they're all vaccinated. Now, remember when I said I believe the teacher's position is actually understandable? Self-preservation first. But what if the doctors and nurses who work the COVID-19 ward in your local hospital's emergency room took the same position as our teachers? What if the medical staff were unwilling to take any risks for the benefit of others? Now, what if that very same teacher who was unwilling to report to his classroom found himself needing to go to the ER with congested breathing and no sense of taste or smell? Now imagine that when he gets to the hospital, he's greeted by a sign at the locked sliding glass doors that reads, "Distance medical care only, reach us online." The lockdowns are impractical, and even the lockdown dictator himself, Governor Newsom, knows it. People need to socialize and take a break from the stress of work and everyday life. On November 6, 2020, Newsom was caught disregarding his own coronavirus social distancing orders. Newsom was photographed in a large group luxury dining at the French Laundry, an upscale Michelin star restaurant in Napa, California. The partygoers were seen laughing merrily away, shoulder to shoulder, indoors, and not wearing face masks. At the same time, the Newsom administration was gravely warning Californians not to gather with their own families during Thanksgiving. Newsom and his wife Jennifer were attending a birthday party for his political advisor Jason Kenney. Also in attendance were California Medical Association officials Dustin Corcoran, who is the CEO, and Janice Norman, a lobbyist. Newsom's behavior proves that the coronavirus rules don't apply to them. Technically, Napa County restaurants were allowed to serve patrons inside at the time of the birthday celebration. But while this behavior would be passable for an average Joe, it's downright shameful coming from the lockdown czar himself. It may be perfectly legal to wear a mink coat if you're average Jane, but it's not a good look if you're the president of PETA. Here's what California Governor Gavin Newsom had to say after being caught red-handed. "I want to apologize to you because I need to preach and practice, not just preach and not practice, and I've done my best to do that. We're all human. We all fall short sometimes." But Newsom was smug and unapologetic, even though he was supposed to be a
apologizing. He looked relaxed and stared confidently into the camera, cool and confident in his fitted designer suit. You couldn't tell if Newsom was delivering an apology for something he had done wrong or giving you a lecture. But if there was any doubt, it soon became clear that it was the latter. The California governor went on to announce a reversal of his reopening plans and instead ordered 28 counties to return to the purple tier, which sentenced 94% of Californians to the state's most restrictive lockdown rules. The steps our national and local governments have taken in response to the COVID-19 pandemic may eventually prove to be catastrophic economically. The two stimulus packages as of December 2020 total to about $3 trillion. This means, to use a medical analogy, that the harmful effect of all the business shutdowns and stay-at-home orders was so damaging that we had to inject our country with a $3 trillion adrenaline shot to keep it from going into full cardiac arrest. That's $3 trillion, and we don't even know if that will prove to be enough. Let's just take a moment to conceptualize how much money $1 trillion really is. Imagine you stashed $10,000 in a suitcase for a rainy day. Now imagine that you had 100 of these suitcases, each filled with $10,000. And you put these 100 suitcases in a garage. Now imagine that you had 1 million of these garages all around the world, each filled with 100 suitcases, and each suitcase filled with $10,000. Got all that? Well, all that dough you have stashed around the world adds up to $1 trillion. Now you might say, America's the richest country in the world. With all that money that Uncle Sam rakes in, $3 trillion can't be that big of a deal, right? Wrong. Actually, $3 trillion equals 85% of all the money the United States was forecasted to rake in for the entire 2019 fiscal year. Imagine all of our entire yearly income being spent on paying for the COVID-19 stimulus relief package. That doesn't leave much to pay for anything else. In reality, we finance the enormous bill by borrowing the money, i.e. issuing bonds. That is, we just put it on the country's credit card and kick the can down the road. The blue-colored pie chart shows the fiscal 2019 United States annual outlays or expenditures. By comparing the green-colored revenue chart to the blue-colored expenditures chart, it becomes clear that the United States spends more cash than it takes in a year. And unfortunately, this is a regular thing. Recently, the Congressional Budget Office predicted that the COVID-19 pandemic would raise the fiscal year 2020 deficit to $3.7 trillion. This means our country's finances are on wobbly legs, since every year we're spending way more money than we take in. Now, some of you may be thinking this is all a bunch of fiscal mumbo jumbo that doesn't concern me or my family. As long as I get my stimulus check, who cares, right? Wrong. Guess who's on the hook to pay off that massive credit card debt? You are. You, your children, and your grandchildren will have to pay it back in one way or another. As of December 2020, the national debt was at a staggering $27 trillion. The national debt is essentially a running credit card balance of all those annual deficits that we've been piling up each year. Just as this would be bad for your household, it's bad for your country also. Why is it so bad? Because every year we have to use part of our total income revenues to pay for the interest due on all that money we've been borrowing. Let's take another look at the blue fiscal 2019 expenditures chart. Notice that our interest payments is nearly equal to our Medicare expenditure, and it's more than half what we spend on defense. Currently, the Treasury 10-year note interest rate is only 2%, but as interest rates rise, the size of interest payments will rise too, leaving our government with even less money to pay for necessary services like Medicare and Social Security. This will in turn require us to borrow even more money, which will increase our interest payments even higher, and so on and so on. It's a vicious downward spiral that we don't want to be in. The truth is that the United States financial situation is perilous. Here's another sobering fact. Social Security is headed towards certain financial crisis. The Congressional Budget Office reported that the Social Security Fund will be broke by the year 2033. This diagram illustrates the projected rise and decline of the Social Security piggy bank over the period 1980 to 2040. The black curve, revenues, is the amount of money in the fund. This represents all those pesky Social Security deductions you see coming out of your paycheck every week. The red line, the expenditures, represents all those monthly Social Security checks that go out to retired folks. Under current projections, the Social Security Trust Fund declines towards depletion in 2033. At the depletion date, the Social Security Fund does not actually vanish, since Social Security tax revenues will still be coming in, thanks to your Social Security tax payments that will still keep coming out of your paycheck. But depletion will mean significantly smaller Social Security checks by the time you retire. Count yourself lucky because your children probably won't get anything. Unless you're within a couple years of retirement, you're very likely paying into a Social Security plan that's not going to benefit you very much. In response to the looming bankruptcy of the Social Security Trust Fund, some lawmakers have proposed pushing the full retirement age up to 68 or 70. Most likely the resolution will include Americans having to swallow both bitter pills, a later retirement age and lower monthly Social Security checks when you do finally retire. And now consider that all these dire projections for the Social Security Fund were calculated before accounting for the COVID-19 pandemic stimulus bills. The point of all this is that America's rising national debt is already out of control. Every time we lock down a business, every time we bankrupt another restaurant, every time a merchant loses a sale, we're losing desperately needed tax revenues at both the national and state levels. We're digging ourselves deeper into a hole of debt. We're lowering our Social Security payments and lowering our Medicare and Medicaid insurance benefits. These lockdowns are basically ending the quality of life for nearly all Americans. Governors like Gavin Newsom, who mandate sweeping lockdowns across our country, are the problem and not the solution. Another major problem with the California governor's lockdown strategy is that it is not guided by factual data. One would expect that there would be strong evidence confirming that the coronavirus infections are coming from restaurants, gyms, barbershops, and churches. After all, these establishments were shut down in at least some form from the beginning of the pandemic back in March of 2020. But actual data collected around the country does not show this to be the case. The Illinois Department of Public Health gathered data of infection sources based on contact tracing. Notice that restaurants accounted for only 5% of infections, while gyms registered only 1.6%. If anything, the culprits were schools and hospitals, which registered 14% and 9% respectively. But even if schools and hospitals are the largest sources of COVID-19 transmissions, it doesn't mean that they should be shut down. There are perfectly acceptable explanations for why these places will have higher infection rates than others. People tend to go to hospitals when they're already ill, say with the coronavirus. Obviously, the probability of becoming infected will be higher at hospitals than at a sandwich shop. It also stands to reason that infection rates at schools will be higher because schools tend to be a very social, interactive environment. But even if you did shut down hospitals and schools, you would still have to deal with the remaining 77% of the virus spreaders. Your community would lose critically essential resources, emergency care for the sick, and in-school learning for students. And at that cost, you would only eliminate 23% of the problem. This graph of California coronavirus cases confirms the obvious. The most dramatic surge in cases aligns with the Thanksgiving holiday. At private family gatherings, people are by far more likely to engage in close conversation and contact with friends and family. There are no employees walking around reminding people to pull up their face masks. Restaurant supporters have made this case from the very beginning. On December 16, 2020, San Diego Superior Court Judge Joe Woelfel issued an injunction barring enforcement of rules that shut down live entertainment and in-person dining in the county. The ruling came in a lawsuit filed by 2 San Diego strip clubs, but the judge clarified that the injunction also applied to restaurants. The ruling stopped state and local officials from enforcing COVID-19 shutdown orders against restaurants and live entertainment. As a result, San Diego County officials announced that they would no longer enforce restrictions against restaurants and live entertainment venues. In his ruling, Woelfel said that the state and county had not provided evidence that showed a connection between open restaurants and live entertainment venues and the spread of COVID-19 or the impact on intensive care beds. Fortunately, the tide may be turning on overreaching governors like Gavin Newsom. On December 3rd, the Supreme Court ordered California judges to re-examine the state's ban on indoor worship services. This came a week after the Supreme Court had voted 5-4 to lift tight limits on churches and synagogues in New York City. The court said that those restrictions violated the First Amendment's protection for the free exercise of religion. In aligning with the court's ruling, the Los Angeles County Health Department diverted from Newsom's lockdowns, which prevented more than 90% of churches from holding indoor services. The new order allowed places of worship to resume indoor services, provided that they follow safety guidelines such as physical distancing and face coverings. Pandemics aren't new. Here's a list of the major world pandemics that have broken out over the last several decades. And now that the world is more interconnected than ever, future viral outbreaks are inevitable. The question is, how will we respond next time? And while the answer to this question may not be easy, what we do know is how we should not respond next time. We should not let politicians lock us down like peasants, permanently destroying hundreds of thousands of restaurants and businesses and keeping our children out of school. Gavin Newsom's erratic and ineffective coronavirus plan has destroyed people's livelihood and caused irreparable damage to our children's future. Newsom's rules are crude and overreaching, sloppily mandating broad-brushed rules over communities and businesses that are not spreading the virus. We want our children back in school just as Newsom's kids are. Newsom should have spent his time securing personal protective equipment for our schools and not inventing elaborate lockdown color schemes and shutting our lives down. Morale is low and discontentment is high as the people have lost trust in his plans that have proven to be nonsensical and ineffective. Newsom has failed the people of California. This time, let's complete the job. Recall Governor Gavin Newsom. Go to rescueca2021.com to sign the recall petition. Be warned that there were already 5 prior recall attempts on the governor, and all fell short of gathering the required number of signatures. Supporters for this 6th recall will have until March 17, 2021 to collect about 1.5 million signatures. As of December 20th, 2020, almost 900,000 signatures had been collected. The recall campaign started when Newsom endorsed a bill to compel companies to classify independent contractors instead as employees with benefits. Then Newsom's administration announced that thousands of inmates would be granted early parole to stem the coronavirus spread. Then Californians were informed that illegal immigrants would receive coronavirus relief funds from the state. The birthday celebration at the French Laundry was Newsom's latest head-scratcher. Well, thank you for listening, and please forward a link to my video to 3 more people. I'm just a regular Joe trying to do my part. Please help and do your part to make California and your state and our nation a better place. Thank you.